Tonight, you'll be hearing 5 stories told by the descendants of Holocaust survivors, plus one by Matt. Obviously, these stories are not always easy to hear, and certainly for the people telling them, not always easy to tell. But it's so important to continue to tell them and make sure, it's so important to continue to tell them to make sure that these events are never forgotten, and so that we can hear exactly what happened from the people who lived through it and grew up with those who lived through it, not to let other people who have their own motives tell these stories. Additionally, coming together to listen to these stories strengthens our community and deepens our understanding of the Jewish experience. As we all know, public speaking is the favorite thing of very few people, and telling stories like this adds a layer of vulnerability on top of that. And really looking out at a bunch of people who have their nice faces on and are actively wishing them well makes a huge difference. Next up, you guys, is Evi Shekhman. Evi lives in Farmington and runs her own consulting firm focused on strategic planning and marketing. She is involved with committee and board work and says she is passionate about working with Holocaust and anti-Semitism engagement at the middle and high school levels, which has become increasingly important with the rise in anti-Israel and anti-Semitism on college campuses. Evi is going to have a fun brunch because she is inviting Jackie Mason. More fun, I think, than Moses. Here's why she chose him. Jackie Mason, because my dad still quotes him, because we should all take a break from the everyday and learn how to laugh in spite of and at it, because it feels like every wrinkle he has tells a story that he managed to make into entertainment. And I didn't mention this in my story, but my grandmother has a wicked sense of humor, which Evi, I think, is a very good quality in a grandparent. Please welcome Evi Shekhman.
It could be Passover, it could be Shabbat, or it could be any dinner, but the whole family is here. The grandparents from Toronto, my oldest from Washington, D.C., and us locals, my husband and my 2 boys. And we're loud, we're obnoxious, we're all opinionated, and we argue all the time. But we're all together. And we talk about all the places that the family has lived and made homes. Riga, Kaunas, Bucharest, Tel Aviv, Toronto, New York, Vancouver, and Farmington, and that's not mentioning all of them. We've talked about the different places or types of governments and experiences that the family has gone through, from authoritarianism to the Soviet Republic, to democracy, capitalism, and the emergence of Israel as a force to be reckoned with. And we're not shy from being truthful in the good, the bad, and the ugly. We know everything that happens, and the grandparents are very open about the experiences that they had behind the Iron Curtain. So our house is loud. And to give you a taste of the type of arguments and debates that we have, because both sides come from Holocaust survivors, we talk about, should we boycott companies that took part in the Holocaust? And it is a debate, because 70 years have passed, and they're everywhere, whether it's car companies, pharmaceuticals, or clothing lines. And we discuss this, and how much remorse should they have in order to make it okay? And then we talk about what the grandparents talk about, and they compare Holocaust museums, and the best one they think, or one of them, is the one in Berlin. So, on a humorous note, while they talk about the Holocaust museums, they also talk about cruise ship itineraries, and this is all in the entertaining dinner. So, dinner at our home is not for the faint of heart. I love this. I'm an only child. My mother is an only child, but it's not by choice. It's something that she just was. My grandmother was born sometime around 1910 in the shtetl of Jonava in Lithuania. She went to school up until grade 5 because she found it boring afterwards, and she decided it was a waste of her time. When she was older, she moved to Kaunas, Kovno, and she worked in a shoe store. And there she met her husband, and they had a little girl, Miriam. When the Kovno ghetto opened and everyone was put there, her daughter died of starvation. And then, when everyone was sent to Stutthof, she was selected to go into the workers' line because her leg looked sturdy. The rest of the family did not. So after the war, when the camp was liberated, she returned to Kaunas, and she was waiting to see if anyone else would return. She heard that her parents and her brothers and her sisters in Jonava were shot and killed into ditches, and so they were never heard from. But there was one brother, Bernard, who was somewhere in France. We grew up in a suburb of Toronto, and my grandmother lived with us. She was always there. There were 4 of us. And I would come home from school, and she would be waiting outside for me with macaroni and cheese in a bowl and a lid wrapped in newspaper, and this would be my first dinner, because she was always worried about food. She would have money hidden under the mattress, and she would have jars of coins of all the pennies and dimes that she collected scattered around. And she didn't speak English, because when she moved to Canada, in her 70s, she already spoke 6 languages, and learning English, when it wasn't for survival, was just pointless. So that's how she lived. I didn't hear any of her stories. We really didn't have any conversations, and I don't know what happened during the war years. I didn't know what happened. But I did hear about her brother Bernard, because he was Bernard of the Hero. Bernard, after the war, Bernard, as a teenager, left Jonava, and he went to go to Spain to fight with the international brigades. And after that, he joined the Red Army, and he was captured by the Nazis and sent to Auschwitz. There, he escaped with 2 other inmates with documents documenting all the atrocities that were happening. And afterwards, he joined the French partisans, and he helped fight. His story is so miraculous you could make a movie, and he has his story documented through the Shoah Foundation. When I was 10 years old, he came to visit. This was the first time and only time that the 2 of them would be together, from before the war until his death not long after his visit. But I would sit there trying to find stories and meaning because I didn't hear them at home from my grandmother. And he shared his daring feats of how he parachuted into enemy territory, and he was lucky because his parachute worked, because the one in front of him didn't. And I was sitting there tracing the tattoo and the numbers on his arm, knowing or feeling like they were marks of valor and heroism, and not from dehumanization. And so watching the 2 of them side by side, trying to understand how 2 siblings could go in such different directions was really difficult. My grandmother was stuck behind the Iron Curtain. By her mid-40s, she had lost 2 husbands. She had lost her whole family, and she was a single mother. She worked in a cigarette factory, stole cigarettes, and was to get food and sell them on the black market. And she was caught, and she was sent to jail, and she didn't think she'd return. So her life was very difficult, and she was quiet, and her heroism was silent because she survived. In 2003, in April, it was a SARS epidemic in Toronto, and we were on semi-lockdown. No, all the hospitals, no in and out, no visitor policy. But I was getting married, and during that time, my grandmother was in an old-aged home, for a home for the elderly called Baycrest. And Baycrest was the place where all Toronto Jews wanted to live their final days. So my soon-to-be husband and I, after we met with the rabbi in the morning, took my future in-laws' beat-up minivan and went to go break my grandmother out of Baycrest. What I didn't realize until I had children is that my grandmother survived starvation, death of her family, and a hard life throughout her whole life because of me. First it was the idea of me, and then it was because of me. So her being with me and sitting with me was her appreciating and being thankful for every day that she had. She had the opportunity to meet 2 of my sons, but she was already well into her 90s. And when she was in her 90s, she started to suffer from age-related dementia, which unfortunately made her relive the horrors of her life. And from there, we started to hear some of the stories, and she would ask questions. Are my parents, my brothers and sisters, my daughter, are they still alive? Where are they? And she would talk about being starving and not having enough food, and the soup that would be made from grass. And she shared these stories, and we were able to at least hear it and get a piece of it. My 3rd son is named Victor, and he's named after her. Her 2 surnames are Volkus and Walensky, so Victor is aptly named after him. And as we're all together with the family, arguing loud and obnoxious, her silent heroism and her stories is sometimes the loudest sound that we hear at home. Thank you.
Excellent. That was great. That was a really fantastic tribute to your grandmother. And I think we all got a really great picture of what it's like at your house, and it sounds amazing. It sounds like Jackie Mason would really, really fit right in and enjoy that whole scenario. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.